Welcome back to the Women in Engineering podcast. I'm Stephanie, your host. Today we are joined by Laurie Lockington-Wong, who is the course coordinator and instructor for the fourth year Engineering Ethics course, and she is in the Thompson Centre for Engineering Leadership and Innovation at Western Engineering. We are going to be discussing some tips on how to ace your interviews and things to keep in mind when you are presenting yourself professionally. Hi Laurie, how are you doing today?
Hi Stephanie. I'm doing well, thanks. It's International Women's Day.
Yes.
And thanks for inviting me.
No problem. I am, and all of our listeners are glad to have you on the podcast. So first off, I was wondering, Laurie, if you could give us a brief introduction of who you are and how you got to where you are today.
Thanks, Stephanie. So I'm a chemical engineer. I graduated from Queen's University, and through my work experience in industry, I became certified as a professional engineer, and I've worked for about 20 years in various industries, in product development, sometimes project management. I've had managerial responsibilities, and all of this industry experience has been really helpful because in 2020, I turned to education and have really enjoyed this pivot in my career to be educating engineering students. So I started at Western Engineering about 3 years ago as a full-time lecturer and course coordinator for the Engineering Ethics course. I love meeting fourth-year students. It's a lot of fun teaching this group. And part of my role right now, in addition to course coordinating and lecturing, is I am implementing the strategic plan. I'm heading up some of the work around that plan implementation.
What is the strategic plan for?
Sure, Stephanie. So you may be aware that Western University has a 5-year strategic plan, and each faculty has developed a 5-year plan to dovetail into that Western University plan. So back in 2020, 2021, our faculty, Western Engineering, had a number of retreats to create our strategic plan as a faculty, and now we have various impact teams that are implementing those activities. My job is right now, part of my job is to head up the work and coordinate the work and keep it moving forward.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. We're going to get straight into the questions for today. So we're going to be in the view of a student for all of these questions. The first one is, so I'm a student, I've received an email for my first interview. What should I be doing to prepare?
Getting that email is so exciting. I remember because I have also interviewed for a number of positions in my career. The first thing is my best practice is to have saved a copy of that job ad so you can recall what were those skills and attributes that the company's looking for, what are the responsibilities that they're going to assign to you, and make sure you're really familiar with that. Secondly, I would be researching the company if you haven't done that already. It's good to know what's happened for this company lately. Have they been in the news? Have they started up a new arm in their manufacturing process? Or have they developed a new technology? Have they recently hired? Have they established a new facility, production facility, or other type of service? So definitely understanding where they're at this point in time is helpful to have as information when you go into your interview. And understanding, at a minimum, knowing their website really well to see what kind of organizational structure they have and what their products and services are.
Yeah. It shows that you are trying to get to know the company and you're understanding a few things about them. And you can also keep that in mind when thinking about whether you'd be a good fit for that company or not.
Exactly, because you're also interviewing them, right?
Yeah.
Making sure that it's a good fit for you too.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Are there any resources that you would recommend students to use when they're preparing for these interviews?
One thing I like to do is tell my students, because sometimes my students ask me these questions, how to prepare for interviews. And I would say that having a story prepared is really important, and actually several stories. As part of my course, actually, we build leadership stories by looking at the activities that we've done, either as student or as a professional in your career. How are you developing yourself in an ongoing way? And looking at, for example, an activity that you do outside of your education or outside of your job, such as volunteering or reading a book about leadership or reading a book about business or engineering or technology. What association are you part of, for example? And then considering how that is helping you develop yourself and continue learning in your career. And if you can form that kind of story, then and have those stories prepared for your interview, then you're going to really be ready for the kinds of questions that you're going to hear in that interview.
I think interviews actually allow you to have a moment of self-reflection, and it's a good way to think about what activities you've actually been doing and how they've been supporting your career or whatever goals that you may have.
Yeah, I really agree with that. Absolutely. And I know I've mentioned you're looking at activities outside of your career, but even your past job experiences can make for great stories to show how you've led a project well, or how you've collaborated well with a team, or how you had to learn aspects of a technology or maybe a tool or software that helped you do your job better.
It's also, I think, okay to share stories where you weren't originally amazing at whatever skill it was, but that you can show, hopefully, that you learned from or recognized that you needed to work on that skill, and you did. And then your story is about how, yes, you weren't immediately competent in it, but you recognized where you had weaknesses, and then you grew from then.
That's a great point. And if you look at any of the top business articles on how to interview, they're going to talk about that question that you get where, what did you do wrong, or what attribute about yourself would you like to improve? And that's an opportunity really to tell about how you've learned from something and how you are continuing to develop that skill.
It's not just about, I guess, sharing a weakness for just them wanting to know what's wrong with you. It's an opportunity to share a story.
Exactly. You want to leverage that question and make sure it shows that you are open to learning and that you are good at self-reflection. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, the next question. I get nervous during interviews. Do you have any tips that I could use to be more confident when interviewing and networking?
All I can say is practice. And we've already talked a lot about preparation, but if you are really prepared with your research about a company and your knowledge of the position that you're applying for, then you're armed with that information. We've talked about stories and having those prepared. And I think the third piece is the practice. So it's as simple as recording yourself talking and listening back to it, listening for your tone, listening for the inflection in your voice, and ensuring that you sound confident in what you're doing.
Okay, spinning off of that question a little bit, what are effective ways that students can communicate their technical skills during interviews?
So this is another opportunity in my mind where you want to employ a story. And having the stories ready and knowing that these stories will fit into different types of questions. For example, if we were leaning on a story that was about how you worked with a team, you could then highlight the technical skills that you needed with that team and talk a little bit about the technology in that story too. So perhaps you have an internship where you developed some skills. And you can talk about your work in that company, then the skills you brought, whether they're technical or if they're professional skills, then you can shine by really just explaining how you were involved and how the work was done.
especially if you have like several stories that perhaps have to do with like team building or leadership. Try to see if any of them relate to technical skills that are on the job posting. Then like if you have a bank already, choose the one that not only highlights your leadership skills, but also what technical skills they're looking for as well.
I totally agree, Stephanie. If they haven't asked you about your technical skills, but you feel like you need to mention them, then that's a great way to weave those technical skills into your story. So perhaps they've asked you about your teamwork skills, and you want to highlight that you are really competent with AutoCAD, then you might highlight how your AutoCAD design was, how you presented it to the group to help solve a problem.
Yeah. Kind of a follow-up question, and I've experienced this myself a bit. What happens if they don't ask you about your technical skills in an interview? Is that then an opportunity that you have to insert that kind of in your stories?
I think this goes back to really knowing what they're looking for, because it's possible you're interviewing for something where there's less emphasis on your technical skills. But if that's a big piece of your employability and your skill set, then you certainly want to make sure the team, the hiring committee, is aware of that skill set. It might come in handy later. Perhaps your first couple years in a job are in a less technical role, but as you develop, you will end up leaning on the other technical skills that you have. So making them aware of your skills is a great idea.
Yeah. Advocate for yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. A very common interview question is, tell me about yourself. How would you recommend answering this question?
Remember that this is in the context of a work environment. So you want to highlight your education. You want to highlight the type of person that you are. Are you good at working with people? Do you like challenge? Do you enjoy problem solving? So look at those types of attributes. And again, back to that job description, look for, what keywords do you notice in the job description that they are probably looking for in your answer? So this is what I think of as a headline where you can say an elevator speech. You're trying to establish who you are in about 30 seconds or less. And feel free to keep it short, because I believe that the hiring committee is going to probe on the areas that they're really interested in.
Yeah, definitely. I've had that a few times where I will end up saying a short little blurb and they always ask follow-up questions, or if you were vague, then they are going to kind of guide you in the direction that they want you to go in.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think sometimes as a student, you don't realize that the hiring committee might also be a little bit nervous in that interview, and they also are probably pressed for time. Mm-hmm. So by keeping your answers concise, then you're giving them an opportunity to probe and to steer towards the areas they're most interested in.
Yeah, definitely. Another common theme that occurs when you're in the interview is that the interviewer might ask you if you have any questions for them. How would you recommend students answering this question?
This is a really common question, and you're right. It's usually at the end of the interview. So they're looking to see how much you've thought about this role. And this is also, if you haven't already had a chance to showcase what you know about the company, this is a chance to say, I noticed in the news that this happened recently. Or you can showcase that you understand how well you understand some of the issues they might be facing in their industry. But this is also an opportunity that I think you need to take advantage of as a candidate, to ask the company and the hiring committee what problems they are currently facing that they're trying to address with this recruitment. Yeah, I think that's just the most important question you can ask. How can you help them?
Yeah. It will also help you to figure out exactly what sort of role you're going to be taking. And this is something we had talked about outside of this, but you are also interviewing them in some sense. So this kind of question and other questions that you may have for them can help you to decipher whether this company is good for you as well.
Yes, absolutely. It's when you are interviewing, remember that not only are they checking for fit with their company, but you need to check for a fit with this job in your skill set and in your life. Make sure it works for you. And so it's your responsibility really to ask that question. What will this candidate, this successful candidate, be able to do to help solve problems here at the company? And their answer is really going to help inform if it's a good fit for you.
If it's not something that you look excited to doing, then it's probably not a good fit.
And it's probably going to show in your answer. And it's better to find out there isn't a good fit in the interview.
Yeah. Then later down the road, regretting your decision or wishing that you had gone about it a different way.
Right, exactly. And Stephanie, you asked if I had any stories, and I can distinctly recall that asking that question in 2 of my interviews has really made the difference in being selected as the successful candidate. I remember that the people who were interviewing me really brightened when I asked what problems they had, and then they had a chance to talk about some of the real challenges they were facing, which made them recognize that this was about solving problems and not just about hiring somebody.
Yeah. Also gives you an opportunity to learn about the hiring team, which you don't get really in the other questions. So I find that it also can improve the connection that you have with your interviewers because you're actually getting to know them as people and what woes they have during their working life as well.
That's a great point. And if you're fortunate to be interviewing in person on site, another way that you can check for fit is just based on the environment that you're in. Do you notice as you walk through an office building that people are really excited to be there? Do you notice a collaborative environment? If you're in a manufacturing facility, what safety practices do you notice? Do you notice policies? What's the environment like? Are people smiling? Are they looking excited to be there? Mm-hmm. Those are all things that can help you check for fit.
Yeah.
So Stephanie, I guess if I was to summarize everything we've talked about, I would say that getting ready for an interview, it's really important how you prepare and how you present yourself. You want to show up as confident but also curious, trying to show how much you want to learn about this opportunity and that you're well prepared. And so when you're preparing, we've talked about doing your research. I would say looking back at that job application, looking at the skills, attributes, responsibilities, what requirements were mentioned. Notice if the company's been in the news lately. What is their primary project or product? And how have they recently grown or changed? What is their history? So having that, at least a high level understanding of those areas. And finally, I mentioned telling stories. So having some stories in your pocket and checking, once you're in the interview, you can get a sense, what story can I use to describe this, to answer this question? So getting comfortable with that and practicing. And finally, I would just say that at the end of the interview, you're typically going to be asked if you have any questions, and remembering that you want to ask them what problems they're currently facing and trying to solve and how you could help. So that would be my short list of how to get ready for an interview.
Awesome. I think that's a great list, and everything we covered today will be super useful for any students or young professionals or I guess more senior professionals to use when interviewing. I just wanted to say thank you to Laurie for coming on the podcast today. Thank you for listening. Until next time, Western.